Alrighty guys, back for another video. So at this point we've kind of done some kind of good sculpting here, right? And really just kind of getting used to the multi-resolution modifier, how you can work with it by subdividing, the fact that you can go up and down the levels and sculpt with them. You can even, as you work, apply base to shape if you've done any significant silhouette changes, right? You can apply to base just to kind of show what that would look like, and you can always kind of turn your resolution down lower like that. And if you need to, you can always hit apply base. And you see how it kind of adjusts the shape a little bit to match the sculpt a little bit more. To a certain extent, you don't want to go so radical and do an unbelievably huge silhouette change, because that can cause the UVs to distort a little bit more. Not necessarily fatally, but you can get a little more distortion from your UVs on that. So generally, you should already, by the time you're doing this, have most of your major silhouette forms in there and stuff like that. Just keep that in mind, but it's some neat stuff that Blender's multi-resolution does. It's actually quite a good one, particularly if you're in 2.9. Although quite strong in before 2.9. Like I said, the biggest thing they fixed was the sculpt, being able to go up and down the levels and sculpt the different levels works again, right? It worked before, and then they kind of had to deactivate it for like a version or two because of some issues it was causing, and then it's back, which is cool. We've seen some of the cool, neat kind of core tools here, right? Now this is one of those instances where I did want to spend a little more time showing you a few other things on the sculpting for this video, because we're getting to the point where, like probably one or two more sculpting videos, maybe a third one. But we've done some good sculpting here. We can keep using those tools like crease or draw sharp, or just our regular draw and like push and pull, right? Left mouse button sculpts. Keep in mind that you can always turn your statistics on, right? It's one of the new features in 2.9, right? If you want to see this kind of information, it's in 2.83. It's at the bottom here. And you can still have it show up there as well. But if you go to here, right there, you can actually turn statistics on, so it shows it here now. And you can kind of get a better idea of how many polygons you have. Blender on a decent computer can go to tens of millions of polygons. It really depends on how far you guys can push it without it blowing up Blender for you, right? So it is going to a certain extent, depend on your device, how high resolution you can go. On this crab, we're not going to necessarily have to go too nuts with it, but one of the things I did want to show you a little bit of was how to use a little bit of images for sculpting if you wanted to. And then we're going to switch to the gear, and I'm going to show you a little bit about masking. So let me go really quick to the internet. So that we can hopefully get this to show up. And I'm just going to just do a search. If you don't see the internet, it's fine. I'm just doing a texture search. If you do in the video, I'm pretty sure the capture is set to capture display. So you should see it. If you don't, it's not a big deal. All you have to do is kind of do a quick search in for like scale texture, scale alphas or something like that, right? Something like that. Scale alphas. And it'll bring up pictures like this. You can go to images. One of the things you do want to be careful of is that these images might be copyrighted, right? And that might not always be as easy to download as you want. The safest place to go to get these is things like textures.com, right? It's always a really safe place to go get them. But having said that, it's oftentimes people do put these online for free. You just have to keep an eye out for like watermarks and copyrights over it. If you go to like ZBrush.com to get these, if you go to textures.com and create a free account there, you're pretty safe. In this case, I think this will kind of work well for me, so I'm just going to be right-click, save image as, and we'll just call this scales. And this will just be kind of to show it off for you guys. And that actually looks like it's giving me the bad image. If you ever see it save as a JFIF, that means somebody's write-protected it from being downloaded. It just won't open up. So you do have to be careful with that stuff, right? It might not always work the way you're expecting it to. Let's try this one really quick. And that's why, like, creating an account at textures.com, I think it's probably going to give us the same thing there. Let's see that one. Let's see. Save image as. Okay, I think this one should work properly, actually. There we go. Yeah, and you save it saved as a proper JPEG. So if you see it save as like a file format as like JFIF, I have found that that's not necessarily always going to work in a lot of packages. So you're looking for like things like JPEG, PNG, Target, like normal file formats that'll work fairly well. All right, so that gives us kind of some images we can use. And this doesn't have to be a much, right? I just want to make sure you guys get to see this. Now in this case, we've really just shown our major brushes, right? But one of the things you can actually do with this, if you wanted to, is you can go to texture here, right? And what we can do is, this is just a browser for whatever we've loaded in. But in this case, we want to load a new one in. So we click on new, and it goes to texture here, right? Now, in this case, that creates the new texture here. But we actually want to go down to the little kind of, it's like right below the red ball, right? The red sphere is the material stuff, right? We've kind of seen this a little bit a couple times already. We're going to see more of it on this project. But below that is kind of what looks like a red checkerboard, right? And this is actually where you can go and just load in images and textures. In this case, you can already see I've kind of created a texture, so it's there. So in this case, I don't have to create a new one. I just go to Open, right? And what I can do is I can go to Desktop, because that's where I've kind of saved that stuff at, right? So it takes you to a browser, and then should be able to find that one. Yeah. So you saw like that one scales it's not even showing up there, right? So certain file formats just aren't going to show up. So if you're like, oh, I'm not finding that texture, I'm not seeing the texture, it's not loading up. Certain file formats won't, like that JFIF won't. I seemingly won't load into anything. But this JPEG is showing up, so just be aware of what you're downloading. So I go to Open Image, and you see that's now loaded into Blender. So this little kind of red guy right down here, red checkerboard, allows you to load your image in, right? Now I could have created a new image from there and then gone to the folder to open it up, but you can also just go here, and now you'll see when we go in here to click on it, you'll see that it's available. So if you load a couple more textures in, you'll see them and you can go back and forth and choose them. So this little texture menu here really kind of allows you to go in and kind of pick textures. Of course, you can create a new one from there, but that doesn't allow you to open it. So you do need to go to this red one and then go to the folder, right? Kind of the grayish folder, and that allows you to open image, and it kind of will load in an image for that texture in there. So just a little bit about that. So at this point, now that I've got that texture loaded in and it's what's set, right? So you just make sure it's clicked on and set. You'll notice that we can go to stroke here, right? And you'll see in stroke we have space at the very top here. There's actually several options. Dots, drag dot, we'll get to see that on our armor a little bit. Space is kind of the default, and that works quite well for most stuff. You can actually do lines and anchored, which is cool. I'll show you anchored. Actually, it's probably what I'm going to use here in a minute, or one of the options. You can even do stabilized stroke. So we're going to get to see a little more of this. You saw stabilized stroke the other day. I kind of showed it for making your strokes a little smoother as we sculpted. So you could use space stroke with stabilized stroke to do stuff. Now in this case, we already have space stroke on. We already have a texture loaded. And what I could do is I could just go in here and I could left click, and you see it's actually going to try to sculpt with that image. Now you'll notice though that it's not actually looking that detailed. So that is dependent on how many polygons you have. So I'd have to go back to kind of the blue wrench, right? So the red one's kind of your texture, and that's where the image is at and all that stuff. Go back to the blue guy, and we need to subdivide another time, right? So I'm going to hit subdivide to get us up to level 5. There we go. Let's see. And now we're at 3 million triangles. And now you see if I sculpt, you see how that actual scale is showing up more? So you'll notice that it actually basically is scaling or painting based on kind of this tiling effect, right? You saw in texture it sets a tile. One of the things you could do is you could set it to 3D or view plane, right? So tiled is really just going to repeat it. If in the texture you would go to view plane, right? What you could do is you see how it'll kind of just keep kind of dropping it on top of each other, right? So I can just kind of keep sculpting with this image, and just it's going right on top. But this allows us to much more quickly and easily kind of add kind of a scaling effect, right, to our crab. So it's kind of neat, right? We have that space stroke, which works pretty well a lot of the time for this stuff. But with textures, we do need to think about if we want it to tile or if we just want it to do it from the view, right? View plane is really just doing it from the camera view. Whereas tiled, it's going to try to repeat it over the model. So with that. So just keep that in mind, that those are some neat features, right? View plane is what we want here, space. Now, if we want the spacing to be higher, so it spaces more between those, we can turn the spacing up, right? So we can do this. And then you'll see when we go to sculpt, you see how even without tiled on, there's more space in between the kind of drops, right? It sculpts, 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 sculpts. If we go to stroke and we turn that spacing back down to something pretty low, you'll notice that it spaces a lot more on top. So it's like space, 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 like it's dropping, drop, 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 drop. So what it's really doing is it's just applying that image here, and then applying that image, and as you go and you move your brush, it just keeps applying that image. The lower the spacing, the closer it places each drop of it, right? So they're closer and more on top of each other like this. The higher the spacing, the further apart they are. And you'll notice that this is a cool way to do some neat sculpting. Now, you could actually do stencil stuff with this as well. But in this case, we're not really going to worry about that on this project. It's okay to just kind of use the stamp stuff here. And it works quite well for adding kind of neat little details. So you can kind of add that little kind of skin spore stuff. So sculpting goes beyond just kind of that kind of stuff, right? It actually really gives us a lot of cool options that we can use, right? So it's more than just push, pull, crease. You can actually, and this is, I'm just using the regular drop brush, right? The regular draw. But if you go to texture here, new texture, if you go to the red guy down here, you'll notice that you can go to folder to browse for the image and load it in, right? And then it's kind of loaded this texture in. And you see when we go up here, it's available. And if you create more textures and open up more textures in here, you'll see more of them available here, right? The other thing to think about with texture is that mapping area. View plane works pretty well for doing sculpting like this. And then stroke, things like spacing, right? Now, what's really cool, though, is there is another kind of stroke we can use in conjunction with viewplane. In fact, I use viewplane a lot for this stuff. Sometimes if I need a specific stencil, I'll do stencil stuff. And that's cool. It works well. But in this case, I don't think we really need it. We're just kind of trying to add a bit of random noise to it. But what's cool is we can go to stroke, right? And space is what we're using. That works great. But you'll notice there's something called anchored. So I'm going to turn anchored on. And you're going to notice when I go in here and I use anchored, if I left-click drag, you'll notice what it does is I can left-click drag. So you see I'm dragging left and right. It makes it bigger. And then I can rotate it, right? So you can actually, if you drag up or down, it'll rotate it, right? So if you kind of rotate your brush cursor, and if you go left and right, it makes it bigger or smaller. And so you'll notice that we can come in here with this anchored, and we can do some pretty neat stuff just with this scale pattern as well. So right off the bat, you're going to see that sculpting isn't just about creases and draw sharp, although that's very useful and you use that all the time. That's an important part of your tool set. But you'll actually see as well that we've got stuff like the ability to put a texture on, set it to view plane, right? And for now, we'll just do view plane. We'll deal with stencils later on in other projects, but it does work quite well in Blender. So overall, these mapping from the texture features and strokes are really, really excellent in Blender. And some of you guys might remember this from our Mudbox stuff, right? So space is usually what we'll have on for this one, and that one just gives you that ability just to, just sculpt it on like that, just your brush. But if you want a different behavior, anchored, right? And anchored really kind of allows you to kind of left-click drag, and you can rotate and have a lot more direct control over exactly the size and the angle. And that allows you to do some cool stuff with this, right? So depending on the stroke behavior, you can do some different really neat stuff. But you also saw that we kind of did need to subdivide it up to a couple million polygons for you to be able to see this detail more. But you'll notice it is really changing the surface of the mesh because we have millions of polygons. And this is how detail is added to your model, right? We've been seeing that we're not trying to build in the muscle and crease tones, and even in this case, the scales. We're not building that into the low-resolution base mesh, right? We're really just building it into the actual high-resolution version, right? So this is the kind of stuff that always ends up being a texture. We'll eventually extract this out as a normal map. And you can kind of do this wherever you want, and you can get a couple of different images. You could take pictures with your phones, right, and just make sure to get your pictures from your phones onto your computer device, right, whatever device you're using. Of course, you can download stuff off the internet. Safe places to go where this stuff always works: ZBrush.com, Textures.com has a lot of great stuff. You have to create a free account with them, though. There is a free account you can create. Honestly, Google searches, you just have to be careful it's not copyrighted or watermarked. A lot of people don't, though, so Google is kind of in that gray area, right, of if it definitely has watermarks or it's set up to be a file format that your software can't open, that was clearly meant to be one that you're not going to work with. But many people just put them up online for people to grab because they're like, hey, man, this is a cool thing I made. You guys can use it. So keep that in mind. I did want to show you a few more things before doing this video. One, and I haven't really worked with it quite yet for you guys, but I love it and I find it useful, and I actually use it when I'm doing regular modeling. I'm going to minimize this a little bit so we can see this a bit more. Actually, no, it's already there. Good. We're fine. All right. Up here, right, we know we have our shading modes, right? That's wireframe, right? And you can actually see in wireframe mode, you know, kind of as you're zooming, it'll go to low res, right? But as you get really close in, you can see that there are millions of polygons there, right? So when you go into wireframe mode on a high-res sculpt, you're going to go, I can't even see the wireframe. And it's, well, yeah, because it's millions of polygons. Of course, our normal mode's shaded. These we'll talk about a little more later on because they're both really, really cool. This is Eevee, and you can actually do your full cycles, full renders. These are really neat also, but we don't need them right now. So our default shader, which we already have on, that one's fine. But you'll notice there's a little kind of pull-down triangle here, right? So if I click on that, it actually gives you shading options, right? Now, usually when you go to sculpting, it'll put a matte cap on. Studio is what you might be normally used to seeing. Because a matte cap kind of adds a little bit of different shading to it. The cool thing about matte cap also, and you see Studio has kind of a couple of its own options you can pick. But if you go to matte cap, right, and you can go flat if you just want it to be solid, right? Usually not that cool. But matte cap is usually when you go into sculpting mode, it switches to this. What you can do is you can left click on this ball, and there's other options. So if you want it to be red wax, or when we do our car later on, car paint, right? There's a couple of cool car paint ones. And you notice how great this looks in real time already. Eevee's real-time viewport rendering in Blender is quite excellent. A lot of you guys remember Mudbox. Eevee's Blender blows Mudbox out of the water. I'm going to show you guys how to do glows on later projects, and they look amazing in real time. And when you render them, you can actually get them to look great too, but you have to kind of add a filter through the compositor, which is not hard, and you get a lot of features with that, which is neat. So, but you can actually pick different matte captures, right? So we've got all that stuff available for us, right? And yeah, so we got those nice little matte caps and things like that. So you can switch those around if you want to, right? So this little pull down, you have those abilities, and those are pretty excellent. All right, I think this will probably be a good place to stop on this video. I'll wait for our next video to show you some stuff on the armor. Like I said, we got one or two more sculpting videos I want to do, and we could save those to doing armor stuff, and we'll bake some stuff out. But I think that'll be a great place to stop for that. But I just really wanted to show you guys the matte cap stuff, and how to start to load in textures, and how to use your strokes in different ways to actually use images and patterns to sculpt with. And now you can start to see this really takes our crab to that next level. All right, like I said, that'll probably be a great place to stop.